Welcome everyone to the next episode of our second season of People Keeping It Sacred, highlighting people keeping it sacred in the world. I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, founder of Keeping It Sacred, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's guest, Katherine Jenkins Djom. Katherine Jenkins Djom is a mother, teacher, and anti-racist educator. She enjoys music, dance, Afro-flow yoga, poetry, languages, and being outside of the United States, especially in Haiti and Cameroon. In addition to organizing and educating to dismantle white supremacy in educational and religious spaces, she's also a member of Société Nago, a Voodoozian society based in Jacmel, Haiti, and Boston. I know her as a mover, activist, and organizer working toward justice every day. And I was so fortunate to be at Wellesley College with her for a couple of years and both getting our degrees as Africana Studies majors. I was also then able to benefit from the incredible work she did helping to found the Wellesley Racial Justice Initiative, which I'm so excited to discuss today, among other topics. Welcome, Katherine.
All right. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Rabbi Heather Miller. I'm humbled by the intro.
Me before becoming a rabbi. It's amazing.
I saw it though. I saw it was coming.
You did?
Yeah, no, I felt it. I felt it.
Wow.
It's cool. And I'm glad you're in this space. We need more cool, rabbis and other religious leaders. So glad you're there.
Thank you so much. Well, that's a great place to start, actually, because I know that you've done a lot of great organizing work in the Unitarian Universalist community, a lot of anti-racist work.
But I'll start off with a clarification around language, which I think is a great entry point into understanding the limitations of Unitarian Universalist sort of commitment to grappling with racism and white supremacy, which to the credit of Unitarian Universalists and the association, there is a commitment there, which I think is a great start that doesn't exist in every religious or spiritual community. But it's around this piece of language, right? A lot of people in the congregation that I belong to would, and probably at the association level, would take exception with the use of the word church, in the spirit of wanting to be inclusive, and the fact that it's not in fact a Christian religion, although it definitely has a lot of its roots in Christianity. And to me, that the sort of like fierce insistence on not using the word church, and yet not yet fully sort of having done the work of interrogating how in so many fundamental ways do we still operate like a church, right? We're still sitting in those, militaristic rows with like one leader at the front, you know what I mean? Giving the spiritual orders. We're still mostly sitting down, you know what I mean? We're, a lot of the music still sounds like, Protestantish, hymns and such. So I think that, yeah, exactly. And when you sort of extrapolate back and look at the history of Christianity in Europe and how that was so tied up, how Christianization was so embedded with like the colonization of Europe by Europeans prior to Europeans going out and colonizing the rest of the world, and how it was used as a tool to sort of enforce, to bring about a whole value shift away from, traditional spiritualities, which in a lot of ways, what we would now call pagan, spiritual traditions or pagan religions, which in many ways resemble a lot of what we think of now as like Afrocentric or indigenous religious traditions or spiritual traditions. So I think that's very interesting. And I'll give a shout out to a book I'm reading recently called Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women by Italian author Silvia Federici. And she makes a great point that when you look at witch hunts throughout history, and I say throughout history because it didn't stop in the 15th through 18th centuries in Europe, or, you know, in a lot of people are aware of like the Salem witch hunts in the 1600s in colonial US. There's witch hunts going on today in some what we would call developing parts of the world. And the commonality in all of them is that they're sort of at the crossroads of these complex socio-political, economic developments where like values are shifting away from communalism, relationship with the land, towards capitalism and patriarchy. And so yeah, all of that is tied up, I feel like, in Unitarian Universalism and a tradition that has a lot of potential, but also has so much deep work that still has yet to be done.
It's so amazing. Yeah, I was wondering about like some of the resistance you've gotten to that, because I think, you know, in the Jewish tradition, we're also kind of going through and starting to interrogate our own traditions. And a lot of us have been doing this for a long time, but it's increasingly, there's a lot more awareness of it now. And, you know, to try to allow people to see what might be unseen, right? Like, you know, my wife is Filipina, right? So she like, I started being aware of it through her and through her experiences, right? Like people saying, you know, oh, do you know how to read Hebrew? She's like, I'm Jewish, like, why wouldn't I? Or like, you know, I'm married to a rabbi, like, do you know how many services I've been to? Like, of course, I know what a book is. I know what the Siddur is. I know what, you know, these things are, you know, people asking her, you know, when did she convert? Just assuming that, yes, she did. But, you know, that you don't need to ask people that. It's just another way to feel like they're outsider or different, right? There's a huge movement also talking about, you know, security. There's so much security around synagogues right now because of the heightened awareness of anti-Semitism and physical violence toward Jews and Jewish buildings and things. And it's been, you know, only increasing in the last, you know, 5 years especially. And you know, we have armed guards at the front door, you know, to recognize, like, what does that mean? Like, well, who's being searched, who's being questioned, who's being asked, like, oh, have you been here before? Are you Jewish? Or, you know, what program are you here for, right? But only asking people of color, Jews of color. And so there's like a whole education. I think a lot of normative Jews, like white Jews, have really not seen that these things happen and understood the frequency with which they happen. And it's really hard to get people to kind of think about themselves and like, what have I done? It's funny because we're having a conversation right now and it's the month of Elul and it's a time of great internal introspection. And it's hard enough to get yourself to like introspect and be like, where have I missed the mark? What have I done wrong? Right. But then it's a whole other thing to get an entire institution. And then after you get that one institution, to get the whole movement to recognize and to think about and to really dedicate resources to correcting those wrongs is a big, big undertaking. So I was wondering, like, what kinds of successes you've had in doing some of that work, with the hopes that, you know, we in the Jewish community can also learn from your successes.
I mean, I think it's a great question. I don't know how successful specifically I've been yet in Unitarian Universalism. I definitely feel much more excited and you know, solidly successful in terms of what's happened in WRJI and with the White Alum Anti-Racist Training, which I know we'll get to that later. But just I was very provoked by your raising the issue of security, and it reminded me of this memory. So, as you know, my kids are my two sons who are now 19 and 16
Wow, they're already
are both Black in the sort of one drop definition of the United States racial categorization, but biracial technically. And we've always lived in sort of like the Dorchester, Roxbury border. We've moved around a lot in Boston, but always in a sort of like 2-mile radius in Roxbury or right on the other side of the Dorchester line. And there's a lot of diversity within Dorchester specifically. You have some like enclaves that are almost like solely white and very wealthy. And then most of it is much more racially diverse and predominantly people of color. A lot of diversity within the Black community, Haitian, Cape Verdean, African American, various West Indian and other African folks, and a large Vietnamese community as well. But we've always been in communities that are predominantly neighborhoods that are predominantly Black, and sort of like literally on the other side of the tracks from this congregation, and where a lot of the other members of the congregation who are white live. And the congregation itself, First Parish Dorchester, is on like a little hill in a neighborhood that is predominantly Cape Verdean. So it's a place where we have a lot of attachments. And I just remember there being an event at First Parish at this Unitarian Universalist congregation one evening earlier on, when I was I would say a newer member, and my kids were still little, and they were playing outside. I'm very much like a free range parent, so I was very comfortable with that. And again, a neighborhood where my kids, have a lot of friends and stuff like that, and I have friends. And the pastor at the time, who also lived in the neighborhood, got very concerned and said something to my son about it being, be careful and it being unsafe. And to be fair, I think my son had like gone off in a mood by himself. So it was coming from a good place, but, I paused him there and I was like, this is a community that we're very comfortable in. We don't feel unsafe here. And I just think, in a sort of like a longer historical arc, just thinking about how unsafe the presence of the founders of that congregation, like how unsafe it was for the indigenous people there. I think the Ponkapog band of the Ponkapog and the Massachusetts groups, like this was hugely unsafe and unsettling for them, and how the legacy of governance and this sort of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde split between like what is espoused through religion as values, and then what is enacted by the same people espousing those religions in terms of their policies and economic practices. Like, it's the legacy of that has created these unsafe conditions, right? No one was toting guns around, when those folks landed. And certainly the communities historically that people came from didn't have this, they didn't bring this unsafety with them, right? So, yeah, I think it's important to keep those things in mind. And I always, in raising my kids, I've tried to give them like that long vision and critical thinking around words that are used so casually in our media and our education. I would talk about, the needs of like maybe the community outside of the church, and some of their like cultural practices, and like music was a big thing for me. I'm always like militating for more, I would say, embodied and spirit centered music. And I guess terminology that I started to use was like Afrocentric music as well. But so in the beginning, I was talking about like them, right? These like either folks who were like in the minority in our congregation, and or people who were outside, who are in the community but not coming to this congregation. And it was always sort of a discussion, how do we get people to come?
Yeah.
And then after a while, I was like, this shit isn't working for me. Like, I need for me to feel good, and for me to feel right, and for me to feel like this is a place where I can truly get down, like fully, my whole self.
Right. Your spirit.
Not just, not just like this part of me that has like a Wellesley degree and like can talk about fancy books. Like, no, like the whole me.
Right.
At a certain point, I shifted how I was talking about these things, because upon self-reflection, I was like, this isn't just about, again, some charitable thinking around making this a more welcoming space for others. This is about, for me to bring my whole self and to feel fully nurtured in the space, which I don't feel fully nurtured in this space, which is how I know the work's not done yet.
Right.
It's one way. I need all of these other things, right? I need our spirituality to be embodied. I need this more diverse, soul-rooted music, Afrocentric, whatever label you want to slap on it. Something where we're not just like stuck to the notes on the page,
right,
but where we're letting the spirit really move us.
And participating, and also just a place where everyone can kind of self-actualize it, like, in an equitable way, right? That, it's not just this, this kid is the one who's going to be the church singer, but it could be that kid too. And like everyone can be seen as a leader in the community, and everyone can bring the best of their own strengths, not equally, because not everyone is a singer, right? But has a chance to be their fullest self. So
well, I know like a lot of Afrocentric scholars and activists, including, I think the person I've heard it say it most recently is Dr. Greg Carr, who's another, I know in the White Alum Anti-Racist training, we definitely look at some of his great stuff, him and Karen Hunter. And he talks about the phrase, everybody eats, right? What humanity is supposed to be and was for most of us prior to, the rise of capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy and, imperialism and such. But I also like to think of not just everybody eats, but everybody sings as another sign of like, when things are going right, everybody sings. You know what I mean?
I always think of like everybody thrives, right? Like, I did this other anti-racist training with SVP and Dr. Melina Abdullah, who's also one of my guests on People Keeping It Sacred season 2. She talked about the importance of imagination and imagining that world that you want to see, and really getting into it. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? What is it like for you? And that idea that, like, if we're not that, then there's work to do, right? If we're not creating a place where everybody can thrive, and where it's not just one kind of food, right? Jewish food is not just bagels, right? It's buraka as well, right? It's and it's more than that, right? There's so many Jews are all around the world. So like, let's not just think that it tastes like bagels all the time, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with bagels. I love bagels. But
I love bagels too.
Good thing we put that on the record. But this idea that, if at our synagogue potlucks, we don't have a spread of food, right? And I don't mean to just say food, but like that, you know, we're only trying to get the 20s and 30s group in the door. Like, no, how about an intergenerational approach? If we don't have an intergenerational approach, we're missing something too, right? If we only have straight people, right, we're missing something. If we're only having one gender, right, we're missing whole groups of the world and of our community that could roll up their sleeves to and bring their best selves to the endeavor, and we all flourish from that. And that's really,
exactly.
I love that you have that as like you know, there's work to do if you're not feeling, seeing, hearing, right? Hearing everybody sing, seeing all the different foods, right? Like, you know that there's still work to do. If that, it's a really great litmus test for people, because a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know what we should do. I'm like, well, you need to have the vision, and then if you have the vision, then work toward that, right?
Yeah. In terms of like that inclusivity and everyone being there that you were talking about, I have this very vivid memory. I have several very vivid memories from this past summer. I was in Jacmel in Haiti in July, in the Laku, in the compound of Mami Maud, who is like sort of the matriarch of Societe Nago. She's a high priestess, is how you would say it in English, a mambo. And I remember being in the Jevo, which is one of like the most sacred parts of the peristyle. That's the equivalent of like a temple, is how you would call it. With other initiates, we were going to be brought into the ceremonial space where, you know, the drums had already started, people were singing. There was the mambos and hungas, the priests and priestess who were there, as well as you know, just anyone from the community that wanted to be there was welcomed in. And I remember, like, you know, you can literally feel the vibrations from the drums and hearing the singing, and knowing that, you know, that space, there was everyone from little children to old people, and just thinking like, yo, this is what American teenagers are missing, and what they're looking for when they're like, you know, going drag racing, or, you know, getting deep into drugs and alcohol, right? Or, you know, any of the crazy stuff that, I mean, when I was a teen, our thing was climbing on roofs, you know, just like, because it's like, it's all there, like the drama of the ritual, you know, there's everyone's
drama.
Yeah, but it's like a beautiful drama. It's like a theater, you know what I mean? There's, you know, the music, the drumming, there's the call and response singing. And it's like, not just like everyone singing like to a Beyonce song, you know what I mean? Like, these are freaking songs that like, and they were passed down from ancestors, you know what I mean? Like, these are songs that people sang to like get free from, you know, the chokehold of enslavement and colonization by, you know, these horrible, you know, folks who were like behaving like monsters. I just felt myself thinking about like how, you know, how much less of a like OxyContin crisis, how much less of a like depression, anxiety, mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Even like physical fitness. I mean, like, it's no joke. You're not sitting down. And I gotta give a shout out to the Jewish tradition. I used to love going to synagogue because I'm like, I know we're gonna get up and stand down a lot, get up and sit down. Like, and then like, you know, and also like I love the fact that, you know, the dancing, and it's like the circular dancing, very communal dancing. that was something that I appreciated a lot as a kid. Yeah, I was like, all right, they're doing something right here. Like,
Yeah, I mean, like even the Shema, like even like the watchword of our faith, it has so many like open and closed syllables. It makes you breathe, even if you're not breathing, right? It's like Shema, right? You have to listen to it. The word means listen, like listen, right? There's other ones. Like another prayer called Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi, right? Tehora He. It's all about the breath and the spirit being a pure one because it was given by God. So it's Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehora He, right? The idea that you can breathe through. And if you say that enough times and everyone's kind of like got the reverberation of life is permeating through everyone who's in the room or for the Keeping It Sacred community on the Zoom call. That's one of the downfalls about Zoom is that you can really have that. You can see people doing it. You can feel it even still through. But this idea that you can kind of manifest something in prayer in community that you could not do alone, and recognizing that each has its time and place, and there is still within the ceremony individual reflective space there as well, because you don't want the community to just like engulf you and there's no space for you to have that introspective time. So it's really about a balance between spoken word and the textual tradition and the musical tradition. There's a balance between like the performative music and the participatory music. So it's all balanced, like a good service in my estimation. And what I always try to do is create that balance so that there is always something that's wholly comfortable and in the service for everybody. And there's something wholly challenging for people in the ceremony as well. And that tension really allows people to kind of find their place and have their spirits lifted and moved in a way that's not just like coddling, but it's also not just like interrogating, like, threatening. So yeah, I think that all of that is you're right. It's like the best prayer services are that, but it's also a thing where like the practice, if you practice in community, if you are ingrained in the community, if you decide to not come to one service in the entire year, but you come and you start coming more regularly and you see the community and you understand, oh, this person was grieving the loss of their mother last week. And now, I'm grieving the loss of mine. And so let's like, there's connection there, and there's an understanding that, someone shares that, they were victims of sexual assault when they were very little. It opens it up to allow people to realize like you can be fully who you are in this space, and you're loved and accepted and allowed to claim your sacred space. Like be allowing people to claim their sacred space and just lifting that up and appreciating that as the part of the whole, I think is really important to understand. That's like what you were saying earlier, of like, if it's not good for you, it's not good for me either, right? Like part of me that's missing, like is a part of us as a collective that's missing. So
right, the whole Ubuntu I am because you are, right? Exactly. It's just ironic that so much of this like rhetoric around, not just rhetoric, but policy around population control is emerging from the parts of the world that consume the most resources the most inefficiently. I remember a young person that has grown up alongside my kids, who I really love, who was a very, very active member at the First Parish Dorchester youth group when I was involved with it. Talking about learning about in school that it would take like 6 Earths to sustain a world full of Americans.
Wow.
And I'm like, duh, of course, because getting back to what we were talking about before we got the recorded conversation started, the white supremacy culture, values, and antidotes, that individualism, right? Yeah. Being so just permeating all of American society, even down to like how we eat, right? And you know, it drives me nuts as like a teacher when lunchtime rolls around and like every kid is given like their individual plate with like a, you know, a bunch of plastic packaging, and it's usually not what they want to eat. A bunch of it gets thrown out. Mm-hmm. It's the plastic waste.
And I could go off on the amounts of waste that we create, right? Dr. Philomena Steady's class on environmental racism, teaching us about how the US exports are like international quota for trash in the world to countries that don't have as much trash, so that we can like send our trash there and still like make our quota. Like that says so much about this culture that we have created.
I'm so glad that you brought up that story, because it's reminding me of this thought that I was having as the day that I was leaving Haiti. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, but again, because of like a pattern of white supremacist international policy and like brutal capitalist international policy that is functioned to isolate it from the rest of the world, because it, you know, in these enslaved people and maroons, you know, runaways that had established their own communities, in them achieving their own freedom from slavery, they, you know, like struck at the like lifeblood of the economic system of all of these, you know, slaveholding quote unquote democracies, including the US. And so, you know, there's not a very good waste management system there, and you can easily see trash sometimes in natural spaces, sometimes taking up like a big block, and people walking, you know, like poor people walking around and picking through it. It was something that really hit me hard the day that we were leaving Haiti, and we had a long drive from Jacmel to the capital to go to the airport. And I was thinking also about how in 1820, so less than like about 15 years after Haitians won independence, France, and for just American perspective, America was one of the first places to place an economic embargo on Haiti. So even though they didn't, you know, invade or wage a literal war, the economic war was there right from the beginning and continues until today. But in 1820, France sent like a bunch of ships, battleships to the United States, to off the coast of Haiti. And they were basically like, listen, we're either gonna reinvade and take over and reinstate slavery, or you Haitians need to pay us like reparations for the profits that we as slaveholders lost by you achieving your freedom. And that's something that they ended up doing for over 100 years. I mean, I think it continued until the late almost until 2000, right? Almost into this century. And like, I wish I could remember the sum off the top of my head, but like, we're talking about a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I was just dreaming of like, wouldn't it be amazing if, you know, artists, because again, the power of music, so powerful, you can get like raise so much consciousness that way. Wouldn't it be amazing if like Voodooism and like conscious artists got together and led like a consciousness raising campaign to get everyone in Haiti to clean up the trash and put it on boats and ship it to France as a form of reparations? Like, here, y'all can either like take it in recognition that the cultural influence of colonization is why we have trash, right? Because there wasn't a pre-colonial trash problem. It's all of this like, you know, this economics of, you know, production for you know, hyper consumerism and
Disposability.
Right. And like nowhere in the capitalist calculus is there like a taking into consideration of like Mother Earth and like, you know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, that's a dream. You heard it here first. If it happens.
I wanted to thank you so much for this. Where can people find you? What organizations, what things do you want people to kind of out?
I'm kind of like a late bloomer in terms of like navigating the virtual world and organizing myself in it. I would definitely say for white alums of Wellesley College, come and build anti-racist community among white alums in the white alum anti-racist training. The leadership collective of the Wellesley Racial Justice Initiative, which is the parent organization, I'll call it the mama organization for a while. We recently made the decision that all of our white volunteers should come through that program. So if you want to be a part of, ending racism in community with other Wellesley alums and wielding that power of the Wellesley alum network in the Wellesley College community, your first step is to, or not your first step, but an integral step is to sign up for the White Alum Anti-Racist Training.
WRJI.org.
That's right, WRJI.org. Thank you. See, I'm not good at this. I got to take some notes. I'm on Facebook right now. People can also email me at kjd100@gmail.com. And I'm not trying to recruit anyone, but anyone provoked by, what I've been talking about in terms of voodoo and wanting to learn more about that. Associated Nago, I think there's a website, you can look it up. SOSYETENAGO.
Just want to thank you so much for bringing your holistic view and your expansive understanding and view of the world. It's just such a joy, pleasure, and honor to talk with you whenever we get together. And thank you so much. And I want to thank our audience too for tuning in. If you have someone that you'd like to recommend that we host on the show, please contact us at keepingitsacred.com. There you can also sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date with all that we're programming, opportunities to study together live, and more. Thank you everyone for keeping it sacred. Well,
thank you.